Part 21. Big Marcus left Lumiere's building the night before Lumiere vomited his pixie and Cranford created his cat. At the time these things were happening, he was visiting Kimmy at his apartment where he and Pagan were resting together. Marcus's head was filled with the notions of putting a gang together to protect Wendy and the rest investment in the good business. Also, what was the hit app Dee Dee Moncler that Cuthbert mentioned, and he was trying to narrow down recruitment candidates in his head as he knocked on Kimmy's door. Marcus knocked, buzzing with ideas. Excitement, Kimmy answered a casual, "Hey mate, come on in, eat swa," replied Marcus as he entered the apartment to see Pagan passed out on the couch with nature documentaries playing on the TV. "I got a bunch to get to you, Kim. We gotta start a gang to protect Wendy and the other oldies. She's gonna start a new synthetic drugstore, and she needs a team, a gang, an army to defend it," exclaimed Marcus. All right, slow down, Marco. I can't remember seeing you this excited," retorted Kimmy, guiding Marcus to sit down. Marcus sat. "Also, Cuthbert's on some new business shit. He's doing fucking hits for some dark web app. Sounded like something right up your alley with all your dark web browsing. Have you heard of it?" Dee Dee Moncler. There was a pause. Marcus could tell by the look of shock and denial on Kimmy's face and body language that he knew more than he was letting up. Kimmy stammered, trying to place his words, carefully unsure whether to unload the information about his recent assassin work. "Yeah, I've heard of it. Got it downloaded on my phone, but it's just some underground MMOC." Kimmy took out his phone and showed Marcus the MMORPG-like background that hid the app's slick AI interface for finding contracts, and prayed that Marcus wouldn't pry him on it any further.
"No, see, this is what Cuthbert showed me. You click that hidden icon in the corner and it's a whole different app." Marcus hit the icon. Kimmy winced and Kimmy's Dee Dee Moncler profile appeared, showing everything from finished contracts up for grabs, and even achievements. "No, see, this is what Cuthbert showed me. You click that hidden icon in the corner and it's a whole different app." Marcus hit the icon. Kimmy winced and Kimmy's Dee Dee Moncler profile appeared, showing everything from finished contracts up for grabs, and even achievements. Marcus furrowed his brow and looked up at the shook Kimmy standing there gawking, holding his phone. There was a flashing achievement on the screen which read, 10 contracts completed. Pagan was still asleep on the couch. Marcus was staring at Kimmy wild-eyed. He almost wasn't surprised. This explained Kimmy's sudden wealth recently, and it was something he could always peg for Kimmy to be able to do: contract killing. Marcus perked up and went to exclaim, "You're a proper killer, lad," and Kimmy shushed him, pointing to Pagan, who was slowly waking up. "I don't want her to know." Kimmy loudly whispered to Marcus, who had a huge grin on his face but simply nodded and whispered, 10 people, Kimmy. You're red hot. Cuthbert's only done like 2, and Lumiere started assisting people with suicide through it, getting paid the same. That must be the mercy contracts." Kimmy muttered and considered the fact he knew more people using the app now. "He wasn't alone. I picked power when it gave me the option. Didn't know what I was in for, but now I've taken out a bunch of lowlives and some rich lowlives too. But they're all justified, right?" replied Marcus. "Yeah, I guess so," said Kimmy. "To be honest, they're starting to blur into one. But you should have seen the last guy got him with a gun drone mid-golf swing, cunt went flying." Kimmy laughed uncomfortably, divulging his secret to Marcus, also keeping sure Pagan wasn't overhearing them. Pagan was muttering in her sleep, "Daddy, I don't want to hear the old stories again." In that moment she woke herself up, and Kimmy gave Marcus a look to no longer mention Dee Dee Moncler. "Oh, hey Marcus," she exclaimed with a yawn. Marcus laughed. "What are the old stories, Pagan?" "Oh right, just some bullshit my crazy religious parents used to try to drill into me before I ran away. Something prophecy blah blah blah." Pagan laughed and Kimmy sat next to her and perked up. "Hi Marcus, you remember our old crew tag GSK? Back in the day we used to spay that everywhere. Still a hard-ass crew name too, and this gang's gonna need a name, right?" "Yeah." "What did that stand for again?" asked Marcus, excited but also confused. "Fuck it, man. Gorilla Squad Killers is what I remember, but I don't know Gory Street Killers. Global Syndicate of Killers? It all fits. What do you reckon?" "It's perfect," replied Marcus. "And you're my first recruit, lad," said Marcus, gesturing to Kimmy and then adding, "Oh, and you too, Pagan. The first 2 recruits." "Yeah, shrieked Pagan. GSK, she exclaimed as Kimmy laughed. "Yeah, that's great, mate. Listen, my mate Baker is a lad you'd want to recruit. I'm serious. The kid's got an empire running all on his own. If you need foot soldiers, oh yeah," replied Marcus. "Where's he at?" "Let's bring him in then. There's another lead, Jera, but let's bring in Baker first then." "Easy," replied Kimmy. Marcus called Wendy, who was in hysterics over Lumiere's pixie just being born alongside the apparition of Cranford's cat, and was observing them play together alongside Lumiere, Cranford, and Davo. "Marcus, mate, you really need to get down here. There's things unexplainable," said Wendy as she answered the phone. Marcus answered, "I'll be there soon, Wendy. But Pagan and Kimmy are in now, and we've got a new recruit with foot soldiers on the way. And we've decided we're going under the name GSK. GSK? Does it mean anything?" asked Wendy, perplexed. "Sounds hard," replied Marcus. "Plus me and Kimmy used to write it as a graph crew ages ago." Right, well, as long as we're building something, I don't care what it's called, but anyway, do get here soon, Marcus. Bring the 2 new recruits with you. Ready to witness something unexplainable at Falls?" asked Marcus to the 2 excitedly. "Let's hit up Bake first," Kimmy interjected. Yeah, for sure," replied Marcus, and Kimmy called the now 18-year-old meth dealer he bought his first gun from not long ago. Baker was having a barbecue at an outer suburbs rundown skate park with a crew of his underlings and workers. Bake was 18, but he was already running his crew amongst the older university students and high school students. He had drug running and gun running for him. Bake was from a minor crime family, so he could afford to be a little brash with power. Marcus, Kimmy and Pagan came down the hill climbing over dilapidated pieces of concrete. Bake and his mates were sat in a circle cross-legged, passing bongs and mixes around them. Bake exhaled a large cone as he noticed Kimmy approach. "Bruzzy. Need some bullets, lad?" "Who's this then?" Bake asked, gesturing to Marcus and Pagan. Pagan huffed. "Who are you, little man?" poking Bake's forehead as he laughed. Kimmy interjected, "Bake, this is my girl Pagan, and this guy is Marcus. We've got a proper business venture for ya, oh ye." What's that? Laughed while packing another cone. Marcus went on to explain the good business storefront and GSK along with mentioning Wendy, Lumiere, Davo, Cranford, and Cuthbert. Bake thought about it, so we get free synthetics, right? And whatever else this crew is producing, we'll help put it out in exchange for free dope and protection. Yeah, replied the rest of his crew. Something like that, replied Kimmy and Marcus. Listen, we've got to get back to the building, something big's happening apparently. You should come with us. Pagan puffed her chest out. Come on, big boy, she exclaimed. How could I refuse? Bake muttered back in awe of Pagan's presence. Harry, you look after things here. Bake ordered one of his subordinates, who agreed and sat back in the circle as the four made their way to Lumiere's building to witness something unexplainable. Part 22. The Cat, the Pixie, the Ritual. When the four arrived at Lumiere's tower, Marcus was still excited and raving about how Lumiere owned the whole building and how good business would emerge from the empty storefront below. Two of Bake's crew had tagged along to see what the commotion was about. Bake introduced them as Marcus drove in Lumiere's van with everyone in the back, no break being had from the bong circle amongst Bake and his crew. This is Darrow. Cause he's a hiep. Darrow was a 20-year-old engineering student in Bake's crew for some monetary gain, but he was essentially the grunt of Bake's crew, standing at 7 feet tall with bad acne and curly hair tied in a ponytail. An oversized billabong shirt and cargo pants with steel-toe slip-on boots. He looked like he could destroy anyone at Magic the Gathering while simultaneously acting as a bouncer for some elite club. Darrow sat quietly smoking cone after cone in the back of the van with Bake's end. This is Gibbo. Top lad, exclaimed Bake. Gibbo was a gaunt and skinny Middle Eastern guy, who breathed out his mouth, but seemed more twitchy than Darrow, more dangerous. Hi, exclaimed Pagan half sarcastically. Hi. Hi, the two retorted. Kimmy laughed. I wonder what's so crazy going on at Lumiere's, they can't even tell him over the phone. Kimmy gestured to Marcus. Maybe they're going to kill us, Pagan said bluntly into the air and then began laughing maniacally and said hope not. The group arrived to Lumiere's looming tower and Marcus buzzed 1127. It rang through. No answer. Kimmy immediately buzzed a second time. It rang to the last buzz and Davo answered. Hey. Boys. Kim and Mark, right? He stammered. We got new recruits. Exclaimed Marcus. Oh yes, very good. You'd better get up here. Bloody spectacle. The door opened and the group crowded into the elevator with Pagan pressing 11 and they ascended to Lumiere's apartment. The group arrived at Lumiere's door and knocked. After 2 knocks, Lumiere swung the door open. He was beaming, his teeth all gleaming in a wide intense grin. He seemed pumped and out of breath. More witnesses. Good. He exclaimed. Huh. When Pagan and Darrow and Gibbo both lurched back upon seeing Lumiere's eyes and teeth. Fucking Christ, what are you? Exclaimed Gibbo. Lumiere leaned into Gibbo's face smoking a cigarette and blew a plume of smoke in his face. Gibbo coughed. Well, I'm you. I'm all of you all at once. Right? Wait, no, what does that mean? Oh dear. This child of mine is getting in my head. Lumiere remarked, scratching his head. Your child. Exclaimed both Kimmy and Marcus. What do you mean? Show us, remarked Pagan softly and bluntly towards Lumiere. I will, he said this way. Lumiere leads Marcus, Kimmy, Bake, Pagan and Bake's crew toward the largest rooms in the ornate opulent apartment. Bake, Gibbo, and Darrow were blowing out at the extravagance of each room. You know of the Rothschilds? Rockefellers? This shit seems that bracket, remarked Gibbo. Lumie's a kingpin, said Pagan with glee. Fair fucking dinkum, exclaimed Bake. Lumiere opened the 2 sliding doors to reveal Cranford on one side of the room, guarding a creature emitting pure light and auroras from its fur and calming long waves over Cranford in surrounds. Cranford was being overprotective of his iridescent cat, trying to keep it away from the ball of flesh covered in eyeballs with a huge circular mouth with needle teeth in rows darting around the room with 4 angel wings and landing back and forth on its one leg and human foot. Lumiere's pixie wasn't being aggressive, it seemed almost friendly, trying to frolic and play with Cranford's cat, but Cranford kept nursing it, paranoid. Would you look at that, my friends? We created a new life, twice, we are creators. Lumiere exclaimed as he held up his hand and caught his pixie's foot, holding it by the foot and looking into its eyes. When it looked at Lumiere, every eye on its orb body focused on Lumiere, and Lumiere got a rushing sensation down his back every time he seemed to further bond with it. Pagan noticed the cat first and couldn't look away. She was in awe. She crumpled up toward the animal being engulfed in its light, sitting across Cranford. Cranford stammered, she's pretty, ain't she? She is fucking gorgeous. Exclaimed Pagan, holding up the cat and radiating in its light. It looked into Pagan's eyes with a knowing stare. Where did you get her? Or him? Oh my god, I want one. Exclaimed Pagan. It showed up. I can't tell you, it's a secret, okay? Replied Cranford. Pagan stared down Cranford. Can you do it again? Whatever you did. Please. Pagan bumped up her chest towards Cranford and made puppy eyes to him, and Cranford stammered, unsure what to say. Kimmy scoffed and Cuthbert walked into the room smoking a big joint that didn't smell like weed. His eyes were wired and bloodshot. This ain't fucking real, he muttered to himself. Pagan turned her head from Cranford to be faced with Lumiere's pixie floating in front of her face, and she shrieked, oh god. Fuck me. Is this your baby, Lumiere? Looks like you, she said, remarking on its identical needle teeth to Lumiere. It's my prodigy, Lumiere said as he held the pixie to where his heart would be. Lumiere turned to Cranford and said to Cranford, who was still nursing the cat, not allowing it to roam, let them play, Cranford. It's harmless, the teeth are just for show. I don't know, it's just like that pixie thing looks like it's fucking designed to eat my cat, said Cranford, holding the cat to his chest, which it didn't mind. The cat was beastly careless, as if it had been alive for many years and knew patience is a virtue. Lumiere locked eyes with Cranford. Let them play, he said in an authoritative tone, and Cranford let the cat go and went into a daze. The cat bounded up to the pixie like they were best friends, and the cat bounded around furniture trying to keep up with the flying pixie. You alright, Cranford? 5 minutes had passed and Cranford heard Pagan's voices and it brought him out of the daze. You were kinda out of it. I think Lumiere did that to you. To let the creatures frolic, I guess. He has powers, Cranford. Isn't that insane? Cranford muttered incoherently, still somewhat affected. Anyway, you got that cat doing some cult shit, didn't you? I can tell with that guilty that look in your eyes, asked Pagan. Cranford was unable to stop himself talking in response still too bit to comprehend reality. He spoke, yeah, cult shit. A ritual. I copied some guy in robes I saw in the forest. He did it and fucking exploded. I tried and I got what I needed. Perfect, so we just do it again, no stress. I know a thing or two about the cult. My family are elders among the original church community. The cult is right though, about everything. Pagan laughed. Cranford was finally emerging from his daze. What do you mean? Asked Cranford. Oh, I mean it's just everything they predict turns out true. I've seen it. Even. Pagan gripped her brow and composed herself. Come on, let's do this. I want a cat now, Cranny. Cranford chuckled at the order. All right, fine. Just us, don't tell anyone. He exclaimed in a huff. Perfect. What do we need? Asked Pagan. I've got everything here, but we need a sacrifice. Part 23. Milk. While Cranford and Pagan figured out what sacrifice to get for their upcoming attempt at an iridescent cat ritual, Cuthbert ducked out from the chaos of Lumiere's pixie and iridescent cat chaos-ridden apartment to take out a quick easy contract on two low-life child predators, not elite high-status ones like Demetri, but simply two poor junkie pedo scums the world could do without, named Jimmy and Kippa, who lived together in a rundown cockroach-infested abandoned crack house. Before Cuthbert arrived, the two were in the dilapidated kitchen having a conversation. Kippa, mate, you've been shooting full cream milk by itself. That can't be good for you. Jimmy shrugs. I like how it feels in my veins. Kippa visibly recoils. Jimmy grabs a spoon, pours some heroin into it, then picks up the milk carton again. Kippa squints. Something's different. Kippa, hang on. That's 2%. His voice drops like he's just seen a war crime. Mate, this is too far. Jimmy, I don't give a fuck. Kippa. You saying I can't handle my drugs? Mind your own fucked up business. You don't see me walking around telling you how to be a fuckwit. Kippa, but Jimmy. You're lactose intolerant. But Jimmy didn't listen. He injected the shot into his black veins and for a moment seemed at peace before projectile vomiting waves of milk, blood and stomach acid, which Kippa didn't understand as he had only been shooting the milk, not drinking it. Jimmy crumpled and thudded to the floor, his limbs like a cockroach. Kippa, Jimmy, no. Kippa drops to his knees, watching his best mate self-delete in the dumbest way imaginable. Jimmy's eyes roll back. He stops moving. The apartment falls into dead silence, except for the slow drip of vomit and milk pooling onto the floor. A shadow moves in the doorway. Cuthbert steps in, exhaling smoke, his revolver held casually at his side. He scans the room, sees Jimmy already dead, vomit everywhere. Exhales. Cuthbert, oh good. It's just you then. Kippa looks up, confused. Cuthbert, shrugging, should have used full cream. Bang! Kippa's skull erupts, blood misting the air. His body crumples forward, face planting directly into Jimmy's milk puke. Cuthbert quietly left without a word, silently stepping over the dead bodies and chuckling himself on the drive back to Lumiere's building from this backwoods ditch of a suburb. Diddy Minkler notification. Congratulations, successfully took out target duo. You have been rewarded $900. That's it. Cuthbert muttered figures, he said to himself as he parked back into Lumiere's garage to rejoin the crew and Pixie and Cat commotion having only been gone for around 100 minutes. Part 24. Iridescent mechanism. Cuthbert arrived back as Cranford muttered to Pagan in a half-whisper so the crowd of Kimmy, Marcus, Bake, Cuthbert and Gibbo and Darrow wouldn't overhear. We need a pig. Like a little pig. Responded Pagan. Why? She asked. Cranford shushed her and whispered to her, I don't know why, but the guy in the woods used a lamp, and it didn't work. I went to the pet shop down the road and bought a teacup pig. That worked. Baker and his crew started noticing Cranford whispering to Pagan from the other side of the room as they gradually stopped staring at the supernatural creatures frolicking around the room. What happens to the pig? Asked Pagan, doe-eyed and confused. Oh right. Sacrifice. Well, if it gets me one of those cats, fuck that fucking pig. Cranford looked at Pagan and chuckled. I Kimmy, this guy's coming on to Pagan. Yelled out Bake to Kimmy in a teasing tone. Seeing how uncomfortable Cranford was, Kimmy scoffed. Is everything alright, Pagan? He asked nonchalantly. Pagan looked at Kimmy knowingly and smiled. Everything's fine, doll. We've got a project. It's a surprise. She exclaimed. Kimmy looked at her puzzlingly and then looked back at Bacon off to the side and replied casually, oh good. I'm excited. Cranford stood up nervous and whispered in Pagan's ear before shuffling away. I'm going back to the lab with Truffle. He had named the iridescent cat. I'll get a teacup pig in the morning when the shop opens. Meet me at my apartment at 11 a.m. tomorrow. Buzz 724. He then scooped up Truffle, his iridescent cat, and sauntered out the room, being slyly side-eyed by Bake and his crew and perplexedly looked at by Kimmy. Better be a good surprise. Said Kimmy to Pagan. Oh, it will be, I promise, replied Pagan. Better not be cheating on me with meth cook Hulk. Kimmy retorted. Seriously. Mocked Pagan, gliding herself into Kimmy's arms. I'm just getting something I want, she replied, and it's not his beefy man beef. Okay. Alright. Responded Kimmy, having never really been entirely paranoid in the first place, as he held her beneath his arms and the pixie flew up to the two floating in front of them and shrieked screey ahh. When Pagan, Kimmy was visibly spooked. Bake and his crew laughed. Marcus, who had been quietly observing the pixie this whole time, went to Lumiere and asked Lumiere. You're calling this your child, what do you mean? Where did you get it? Lumiere laughed and caught the pixie again, holding it by the foot and admiring it. I didn't want to worry anyone, but I had a bout of vomiting, for the first time. Ever. That I can remember. Ever? Exclaimed a few of them. Yes, well I mean Cuthbert saw. Cuthbert witnessed the birth, didn't you, Couth? Cuthbert scoffed and held his brow and muttered once more, since going on his Diddy Minkler errands. This seriously isn't fucking real, he said almost with disdain, but more just unable to get grips with the supernatural creature. At least Cranford's cat looked like a real animal. You threw it up. Exclaimed Kimmy in a shocked and repulsed tone. I guess so, mate. Yep, it came from me. Immaculate conception, I suppose, meandered Lumiere, holding the pixie as it drooled, its tens of eyes all darting around the room in different ways, at least one at every other person in the room. Kimmy, Bake, Marcus and Gibbo and Darrow, the rest of its eyes either stagnant or beaming at Lumiere. Lumiere go of the pixie's foot, letting it fly around again. Gibbo and Darrow laughed like Beavis and Butthead. Immaculate, he reckons, they muttered. Got poisoned, more likely, mate. Never trust the agency, muttered Cuthbert on the other side of the room. As he did, the pixie focused all its eyes on him and flew on his shoulder. Cuthbert turned his head and scowled at it. Its eyes beamed at Cuthbert and then it started ferociously licking his face with its long tongue. Cuthbert threw it off him, exclaiming, Jesus fun Christ, and leaving the room to his new apartment muttering, fun gross pixie fun thing for fuck's sake. The room fell silent. Marcus quickly exclaimed to Lumiere, gesturing towards Bake and his crew now sitting down in Lumiere's apartment, re-establishing the bong circle. We've got recruits, Lumiere. And a new name for who'll be protecting the shop and building when it opens. GSK. Oh, Wendy's shop, of course. Yeah mate, no worries. Great. Have you met Otto? You know I have operatives working for me, but we're quite a skeleton crew. I rely on Otto quite heavily. You know I let Wendy move in because I thought I could take some weight off his back. As well as the rest of them. I can never remember the other ones, but now the floodgates have opened, the more the merrier. What could go wrong? GSK. Lumiere exclaimed. Right. Yeah right. Great. Exclaimed Marcus. Maybe I can bring Otto in as well, he mused. Lumiere then turned his head and announced, you know what, it's time we get some real tenancy in this place. Why don't all of you take an abode like my new friends Cranford, Davo, and Wendy? Hell, they've only taken up 3 apartments on the 3rd floor. I have 8 floors of empty apartments, some decrepit, some brand new. Luck of the draw, I suppose. But take a look. You're all welcome. Otto will arrange it for you, he muttered while taking out his phone and texting Otto that he had even more future tenants. The group just stared at Lumiere, gobsmacked. Free. Exclaimed Pagan. Lumiere nodded. The group started grumbling in approval. You're a fucking sickant, mate. Eats way. Exclaimed Bake, and Lumiere grinned a needle-tooth grin, sending shivers down the group's spine, and walked out mentioning, try not to overdo it. Let's do it, Kimmy. Let's take an apartment. We don't like it, you just go back to your apartment. I'll go back with Macy. Yeah. I don't see why not. Kimmy replied. Jesus, exclaimed Darrow, that's the most demonic saint I've ever witnessed. Pagan arrived at Lumiere's building, buzzing apartment 724. She heard a grunt. Then a squeal. Her pulse quickened. Walking through the labyrinthine hallways of the 7th floor, she ran into Wendy and Davo. They were experimenting in the common room, surrounded by equipment. Pagan, you'd be perfect as the manager of my shop, Wendy said suddenly. You're tight, spunky, and energetic. That's exactly what I need. Pagan, caught off guard, agreed immediately. Then she stepped into Cranford's apartment. Total wreckage. A meteorite circle was carved into the floor. A doll hung above it, tied at the neck with an extension cord. Pagan froze. A flashback hit her. She had seen this setup before. People were burned alive. Multiple times. Her mother painting symbols on her with reflective chrome paint. The exact same symbols that were now carved into the floor beneath the hanging doll. Cranford's voice snapped her back. You ready? Yeah. He grabbed the crying teacup pig. Slit its throat. Blood poured into the meteor circle. The doll twitched. Cranford dipped his fingers in the pig's blood and painted symbols on it, instinctively. Pagan felt something take over. She stepped forward, her breath slow and steady. She dipped her fingers into the pig's still warm stump and, without thinking, painted 3 ornate symbols onto the back of the doll. The same symbols from her childhood. The moment the last stroke was completed, the reaction started. The doll gained massive weight without changing size, like something was pressing into reality from the other side. The ceiling cracked. The extension cord snapped. The doll thudded to the ground. Then sharp, iridescent metal shards pierced through its stomach. An aurora shimmered across the room, the same iridescence as Cranford's cat. Pagan felt a rush of excitement. She was almost there. But then something was wrong. The doll began to vibrate violently. Cranford jumped back, panicked. Fuck, what did you do? We're gonna fucking die. Pagan didn't run. She stared, unblinking. The doll stretched open, something pressing against reality from inside. Then it tore apart. Inside was a shimmering steel mechanism. It moved like a solar system diorama, spinning, shifting, symmetrical, an intricate series of interlocking 3D stars. Pagan's breath hitched. What the fuck is that? Cranford looked dumbfounded. I don't know, do I? Pagan stepped closer, staring at it in awe. Then her awe turned to fury. Where's my cat? She punched Cranford's chest. This wasn't supposed to happen. Cranford didn't respond. He was just grateful to be alive. Part 25, Kimmy's existential crisis. Kimmy was in his newly furnished by Otto and GSK members' apartment, laying in bed awake with Pagan slumbering next to him, watching news on a huge plasma at the end of their bed. The news was once again covering the sharp increase in homicides and gang violence and interviewing pedestrians about the matter. I just don't know how we can live like this much longer, a concerned citizen stated. Pagan began to stir and started waking up. Kimmy looked down at her and said, "Good morning, Starshine." Pagan looked at him, perplexed, a little disgusted by the sheer schmaltztiness of what he said. Kimmy looked back at the screen and said in a slight sing-song voice, "The Earth says hello." Pagan stared at him in disbelief and went, "What the fuck?" "A lot of murders," Kimmy remarked at the TV. "Yeah," replied Pagan, a little perturbed, and stumbled out of bed in just her panties to get coffee from their now shared large ornate kitchen. Kimmy had been beginning to have an existential crisis. He had just realized since his last contract he had killed 13 people, an unlucky number if he recalled rightly. He was well on his way to receiving a second Diddy Minkler achievement badge which he didn't know how to feel about, so he went downstairs to Wendy, Davo, and Cranford's lab where Wendy was alone researching and asked her what she thought. "Well, what do you think of what I do?" Kimmy asked meekly with a mix of curiosity and concern. Wendy answered, "You're a murderer, Kimmy." Wendy replied bluntly as she organized boxes. A shiver went down Kimmy's spine. "You're a murderer, for money. And what's wrong with that?" Wendy let the words stay in the air as Kimmy eventually went to stammer to say something, but she went on. "A lot of things, a lot of people would say, but this app. It tells you why, it gives you motive, takes all the rhyme and reason out of it." Wendy organized the last box and sat it down, and at the end of the day isn't that all that matters? Wendy looked into Kimmy's ironically innocent eyes with a gleam. "All that matters, Kimmy." She sat down and relit a huge joint of the same plant matters Cuthbert had been smoking, her eyes widening and sharpening as she exhaled the strange smelling smoke. "Is that you feel good about what you're doing?" She took another drag and exhaled. "You don't do it for anyone else or for your ego, you understand? You do it because you think. No. You believe it's the right thing to do." She took another drag, getting more wired and seedy similarly to how Cuthbert had been acting recently with every drag. Kimmy was unsure how to respond. "Right." Kimmy responded, "I think I get it," he said, sounding unsure. Wendy continued, "I mean, fuck kid, you think I give a fuck when you knock a corrupt CEO or Cuthbert whacks a pedo? Nobody cares, kid. In fact, you're causing celebrations in the wake of your destruction." Wendy exhaled a fifth drag. By this point her eyes were drooping and her face looked almost as if she were scowling at Kimmy as she was hunched over in her chair, but Kimmy knew she meant well despite her quick sudden speedy seediness brought on by her mystery plant narcotic. "What do I know?" Wendy exclaimed, now in a stupor from her mystery joint, turning to a microscope and looking into it. "Only been around almost 70 fun years, yeah. Go on, stop feeling sorry for yourself. Go fun kill people, if not for yourself. Do it for me." She turned her head from the microscope and looked Kimmy square in the eye. "Do it for Wildcat," she murmured unexpectedly sweetly, her eyes bubbling up with compassion and twisted wisdom and affirmation before she quickly started coughing an awful black, harsh cough from the joint. Kimmy knew the sentiment was just from the mystery narcotics, but he appreciated it all the same. "Thanks, Wendy, you've really cleared my head," he responded, trying to leave her in as much peace as he could as she spluttered violently. "And no oof cough. Worries mate cough. Wendy meekly replied as she returned to her equipment. "Better ask Cuthbert." Kimmy thought to himself, "That whack job will have an angle that'll actually make me understand what the fuck I'm doing surely." Kimmy walked up a flight of stairs and knocked on Cuthbert's new apartment door. As Kimmy knocked on Cuthbert's door, he began to regret it immediately as Cuthbert swung the door open aggressively, obviously off his mind on the same mystery weed Wendy was smoking as his apartment stank of it, an unknown acrid, tinny, strong smell. Cuthbert scowled at Kimmy, his head bobbing, seedy and wired in a way only this plant gave off. "Marcus's mate eye." Cuthbert let out as he stared into Kimmy. There was a dull silence. Kimmy barely knew Cuthbert, but he felt so sweet and impossible to himself. He also operated for Diddy Minkler services.
water paints
The
red.
rest groaned,
Head off the
throwing,
neck,
losing
then
bits
I'm
on the
back
floor.
from the dead. No
Then they
scars,
paused.
just memory, panic
A
instead.
hanging second of tension.
Sirens of
And
recursion
then
hum
grabbed.
low in the head, bamboo
The
like
fighter on the
prison,
right stomped down,
horizon like
brushing the
dread.
building flat.
Lumiere flicked a
Silence.
mortal with the Marlboro,
The mother
sharp
let out
tooth
a blood
seal.
curdling
He
scream.
don't
Her
sleep,
voice
don't
ripping
die,
through the
but he
air.
still gotta feel.
Winston winced,
Demon or not, he
slumping
do
back into
business
his
for
seat,
real.
unsure how
Zone
to
6,
process it.
Psalms nodding to a
Malachi
Gnostic
furrowed his
wheel.
brow.
Pixie in the
Not
sink
in
with the
disgust.
Arin. 4 wings
Not
in a
in
blur.
shock.
Wendy says
Just
what?
calculation.
Cuthbert says sir.
In that one
Gucci
stretched
says
out second
bird.
of silence,
And the light
Sarah
says
flicked
stir.
her knife
We
back and slid
baptize the
Marcus
glitch
over
and
the
call it a cure.
The sound of
Kim
his
White
blood
error
hitting the floor
mode,
was
live a
loud in the
hostile
vacuum of
room.
noise.
Presence is pressure,
For a moment,
proof blue
no
eyes,
one
sweet
noticed.
that broom, combat
Then
steak
the crowd
tacos.
erupted again.
Don't live in the boom.
Not in horror.
Stripism baseline
In
keeps
tears.
roots from the tomb.
They weren't screaming
The
for
field
Martin.
bends to growth.
They were screaming for
Say
the
it with
victorious
chest.
fighter, the
Proof
baby
over
killer.
persuasion.
The
Receipts on the
bloodlust was
desk.
total.
Blood are stressed.
Sheriff slipped out
Orbited my
unnoticed.
platform where the skill gets
Then someone
blessed.
saw Martin slumped
Unassailable
over
base.
Biden.
Let the enemies
A shriek
rest.
of terror cut through the
Back
tears.
inside the marsh where the
Then
code is a
another.
wound.
Slowly,
Ragtar marsh
the
carriers
celebratory
hum doom
streets twisted into
bloom.
chaos.
Bellicor terrors like ism,
The
the
arena
muscle
unraveled.
through the edge of chaos
Sharon
bloom.
was already in the
Unified
elevator.
theory turns the chapel to a
Outside,
loom.
the doorman at the
Omega
entrance
ladder
raised an eyebrow
rattles
as she
while
passed.
Kimmy breaks free.
Hey,
Rogue
Sharon.
angel run glow
Sharon
in the
was
storm sea.
asleep.
Endless
It's
weaver watch the cohorts squeeze me. Land sick. Origami bird skeleton still needs to be. Holopathiosis.
Congratulations.
Thread pain into right. Seal what can't speak. Keep some truth out of sight. Rejoin, rejoin, says the sermon at night. Allah, Hu Akbar. The gate starts to bite. Lag takes flight. I move like a monk with a pager that sings. Cathedral in my cadence, but my watch got wings. Zone 6 monastic with the frosty things. I bring out the quarry syllables. Clang. 5 line stanzas like T doctrine. Walk out calm. Hide the bloom colors. Speak like bomb. Badge on the light side. Dip in the song. Name both in the breath. Steady the palm. Exit velocity the only charm. Non-lethal will compost the roads feed. Detox the myths so the wellspring flows. Drop petty wars. Keep lambs imposed. Seasonal rhythm. The gardener knows. Hear the book of judgment crack the sky. Iridescent rip where the clauses fly. Offenses choice. Pain purified. Aggression condemned. Blind descent denied. My trap confessional is legally tied. If holiness descends in a garbage chute, heretics path says invert the route. Filth into fire turn with a scorch mark. Wisdom like fruit, elf ash with no story. Silence absolute. And when twins split the sky with a playground prayer, glitch gods tripped out of unguarded air. We songs there, flags of museums live secrets bare. Judgment pours everywhere, everywhere. I'm zone 6 Hermes with a diamond tongue. Carry sap on the bezel where the map gets sung. Scalar glow, cardinal stacks moving like a bellows lung. Ordinal wind where the omegas hung. Observable world like a courthouse floor. Synapse realm upstairs like a thought store. Iridescent law in the mezzanine lore. EAT's door. 0 point ocean underneath the core. I barter with the weavers. I bargain with code. I pray with a ledger. I tithe and ode. Ice water incense where the sensor glowed. Cathedral of recursion down Auburn Road. Silic bow. Keep many wells. That's the famine-proof trip. Audience canals and I captain the ship. Comparative info. Proof blood grip. Cross-border graphs. Orbit build grip. Make petty refusals look counter for eyeing. Rent free and dead. Jesse, Josie. Naruto the Teth thread. Osiris and Gaia eat breakfast with dread. Churchill in the pocket where the whiskey bled. Allah in the lightning that my syllables wet. Gucci Mane, my Ike Tabari truck grinding bone. Bars so heavy that the arches groan. Choir stalls crack, chandeliers moan. I tied these diamonds to dialect throne. Wing out catechism, hide wires, then talk. Shot don't shatter, pivot your walls. Give half an answer, pass the clock. Dull is freedom, keys and socks. Leave on your feet while the needles fall. Every encounter with the man is a loop. Run rumor, exit clean from D while the snakes recruit. First mother silent in the vault's tight stew. I iron my mist like a pressed black suit. Transparent proof in a boulder of flame. Receipts stacked tall like a courthouse frame. Kim, your talk presence become physics. Bend the game, then back to Strivism farm my aim. Now zoom to the Mars where the meadow wakes. Gauge on seat high and the handle shakes. When S stays in band and the headspace bakes, the lattice hums hymns as the chamber quakes. I nod to the numbers like communion flakes. I'm counting my scars like cathedral nicks. Badge on the light side, dead where it sticks. In fix, healing ain't the same as dodging the bricks. The wellspring remembers every cruciform tick. Sermon of the street with a scholar's view. Mycelium water in a Montclair
looking for
room.
him, for someone to tell her what the iridescent mechanism made of some steel-like substance was, and to try and make sense of what might be going on. She walked up to the hallway and there was a ladder coming down impossibly high from the roof. She claimed that Lumiere was in the attic with his pixie lane beside him when he was curled up and his clothes seeming to be sleeping.
But back to the
He had just hung up the call and booted up an old Macintosh computer from 2003. It was huge like an
Harmony
old
without
computer.
truth is rot with perfume.
Hagen walked up to him
So I
and
keep
said,
the friction
"Can I
like
ask you
whetstone
something?"
glue.
And Lumiere went,
Cathedral
"Otto,
stays
just send me
fast.
some documents.
If I choose
I
love
don't
over
really
honor,
do any work,
I
but this is the
plead
one
the
thing I do
heat. A
occasionally.
fifth on the
Are
record,
things they
like
can't
blood on
crack."
the sheet.
Oh, right,
Not
Hagen
always
replies
wrong,
and
but
looked at
admit
the
the beat.
documents Lumiere
Own
was
the
overlooking
fraction,
on the
don't
computer.
fake
It
the
looked
need.
like it was
Carry the
incredibly
breach
compliant,
like a
but there
crown
was
of
something to
street.
do with global affairs
I
and
pour
contracts that he
flick
was signing off
recursion
on
in a
world
tangle
affairs
of
she had
wire.
heard about in the
Bloom
movie.
leaks through from the synapse fire. Iridescent elders read the ledger of desire. Then bang the
Whoosh,
gavel,
and then he turns off the
underwire.
computer and turns to Hagen and
Zone
says,
6 monk with the golden until the name stands still. Monotonous, brooding, solemn skill. I pace these aisles like a verdict. Bars drop heavy, incense chill. Word, if I regress, that's a felony fate at the gate. Pain forged me when I tempered mistakes. Blind climb kill. Understand before late. Fulfill the law in the case I state. So I stack my proof in a liquor stand. The undeniable drop. No chance for narrators to restrict to the growth of fame. And silence flows in a stunned train. When the house of stories falls like chalk, true song rises where the liars talk. Final witnesses don't beg or fall. We weave the tear with the ag like a temple's lock. This is Gucci Mane stained glass mode. Jesse flavor, God-coded judgment ode. Lovecraft touching a Churchill load. Osiris soil where the Gaia sowed. Allah's echo in the boom. I robbed rough Dion Hayes. 100-year flow in the ether made. All my inner pantheons learn the ways. Share one altar and sin at space. Sing one God's name in 1,000 praise. But I keep it zone sit, hard, unshook. Cathedral bars like a law-bound book. I drop 5 lines till the timeline shook. If the code got shelves, I'm the iron hook. And if sin got shelves, let the legend cook. Ragtar march body, feel like Lee in the grindstone line. Chain of metaphor, it's bricked in the design. My rhymes are made where the map can dine. Forever the loop, and the loop is mine. Bell tower heartbeat, told till night drawn. I hammer these stanzas like psalms and brawn. Endless, relentless, cathedral dawn. Rock hard bars, where the world gets sworn.
So that's it. Lumiere asked bluntly to a flustered, stammering Cranford. Yeah. Well, yeah, I don't know. We tried making another cat how I did before, but Pagan fucked with it, and now we've made this fucking ugh. Lumiere cut him off and stated, "Trust me, Cranford. It's fine." Cranford gulped, and Lumiere walked over to the newspaper that Truffle was now wrapping itself around almost to illustrate Lumiere's exclaimed Pagan harshly. Lumiere grabbed the newspaper and threw it across the room, revealing the mechanism of the intricate spinning and coalescing parts slowly moving in perpetual motion by itself. The reflection of the mechanism shining in the white distance. Making all symptoms to the being compressed by the field choice to allow Lumiere to accept the reality that Cranford made that kind of sound. Pagan laughed. What do you think, Lumi? What is it? You know right. Lumiere put his hand onto the moving mechanism, which made a loud, droning noise that shook the room. Lumiere paused. No going, please, which deflated Pagan and made Cranford's cough. But I wonder. Lumiere remarked and pulled the crystalline coin that was delivered to him in an envelope with his face carved into it out of his jacket and observed it in the glowing light of the mechanism. Pagan walked over and looked at it and exclaimed, "Oh wow. What is that? Looks ancient. And oh my god, Lumi, it's got your face on it." Pagan gawked at Lumiere and the coin, astonished. Cranford had disconnected from the situation and was holding Truffle, telling it everything was okay while it stared at Lumiere almost excitedly and knowingly. "Yeah, it does. What it's made of. It looks like it might be connected to this thing," Lumiere said. Pagan looked at the mechanism and noticed a slot and exclaimed, "Yeah, look, it should fit in there," and pointed out the slot. Lumiere went all right then and slotted the coin inside, and the second he did, the mechanism began expanding from either side and warping, opening up like insanely intricate wings, and Lumiere fell to his knees, hand still on the coin, and his mind began being flooded with visions of iridescent planes of shifting light as he began drooling and his white eyes began looking more lifeless than ever. "Oh my god, Lumi!" exclaimed Pagan as she witnessed the mechanism expanding and retracting, holding Lumiere, who looked brain dead in a trance. Cranford stood up and Truffle came out of his hands and stood over Lumiere looking at him with a wicked grin and started making a weird half cat half human cackling sound. "Jesus Christ!" yelled Pagan and grabbed Lumiere's hand holding the coin and yanked it off, with Lumiere still holding it, and the mechanism returned to its original state and Lumiere snapped back to reality. "Wow," he exclaimed dumbfounded. "You okay?" asked Pagan genuinely. "Yeah. Jesus. You alright?" stammered Cranford. "I just saw something new," remarked Lumiere. "What?" exclaimed both Pagan and Cranford. "I don't know, but there's more slots in this thing," remarked Lumiere, admiring the shining mechanism and looking at his coin. "We need more of these." "I know it. Whoever sent this knows more than any of us about all of this," he said, referring to the coin. "Right. Okay," exclaimed Pagan, excited on some progress to discovering what this was. "Okay, good," remarked Cranford, grabbing Truffle back. "Now can you guys get out of here? It's not going anywhere," he stated. "No worries, mate," replied Lumiere, clutching the coin in his hand and shaking his arm in revelry to the mechanism and walking out the room. Pagan stayed in Cranford's apartment and remarked, "That was crazy, huh?" To which Cranford replied angrily, "Fuck. Get out. Get back to your apartment." Which she promptly did to tell Kimmy all about what had just happened. Lumiere had not really shown the rest of the crew the crystal coin with his face carved into it before showing Cranford and Pagan and realizing that the coin fit inside the new sort of steel shiny thing that they had made. He decided to go ask his friend Cuthbert about it, who told him exactly what his suspicions were. "It's Malachi, I know it. He's trying to reel you in and he knows I'm here, so I'll be the cunt to bring you in," Cuthbert retorted, scoffing and sniffing at the thought. "So Malachi is your old foster father, as well as a high-ranking member of whatever this agency is." "Okay." Cuthbert sniffed again and replied, "Yeah, he's got a lot of jobs. He used to fun harvest my blood as a child to transfuse into himself. The cunt is sick in the fucking head. He believes he can extract youth from consuming and taking in children." Cuthbert paused. "And I think he believes he can extract your unkillable nature too, just like he tried doing to me and probably countless others." Lumiere laughed. "Let him try. I mean, countless have. I mean, at least I'm pretty sure they must have. I mean, that's how we met, right?" Lumiere stared at Cuthbert, who was looking into the distance blankly, and exclaimed with urgency, "Right?" as he was already starting to forget how he and Cuthbert had first met. Yeah, right, of course, mate," replied Cuthbert, "but Malachi is upper echelon. People think you're a Rockefeller. He's the goddamn Illuminati, you understand. He's another level." Lumiere pondered at the coin, looking at it in his fingers, and stated, "Well, I want more of these anyway. They managed to power some machine the kids built doing some cult shit. Hit for just a second when I slotted in the correct part. And when I did, I actually felt something." Cuthbert. "Felt something? Cult shit, I? Well, you know, I do know where Malachi's mansion is. I've even reported to him there enough times that I have an idea of its layout. Part 32. When I gave Lumiere his name, the rain was pelting down in the busy derelict city. Otto Foster, 6 years old, was alone in the street, hiding from adults and authorities trying to find him in whatever abandoned building he could find. He couldn't stay in the orphanage any longer, the place where they beat him, underfed him and taunted him for his lack of love.
He couldn't stay in the orphanage any longer, the place where they beat him, underfed him and taunted him for his lack of love from parents who never wanted him and gave him up as an infant at birth at the orphanage's doorstep, no trace of identity and never to return. The nuns had forced Otto to sleep on hardwood floors and eat nothing but gruel as punishment for a series of trumped-up minor inconveniences Otto had caused trying to stand up for his fellow orphans, and they thought he was paying the price. But Otto defied the evil nuns of the orphanage one final time. At 6 years old, Otto scaled down a brick building from a second-story window using tied-together sheets tied to his bedpost that he shimmied down to the outside talk brick enclosure. Before raising any suspicion, he began scaling a gum tree that's branches hung over the brick walls. After an hour of labored climbing, jumping up intermediate branches, occasionally falling and landing on the hard dirt and roots of the tree and winding himself a couple times in the dead of night, he made it to the branch hanging over the brick and climbed over, dangling from it like a monkey bar at least 5 meters off the ground. Without hesitating, Otto would let go and instinctively tuck and roll as he landed, managing to get away with a few grazes and sores rather than broken bones, and then he ran. The orphanage was deep in a semi-outer terrible slum of the city, filled with low-lives and bad types. Otto had packed a small 2-inch kitchen knife he had preemptively stolen secretly from the kitchen of the orphanage the night before escaping under the evil nuns' noses. As 6-year-old Otto walked the grimy streets in the dark early morning hours of his escape, he clutched that kitchen knife in his hand, tightly holding it so the blade was hidden under his sleeve but ready to use to protect himself at a moment's notice. Otto ran through the streets searching for a hiding spot. After successfully managing to run for a solid 3 to 4 hours, the sun now almost coming up, spreading a dim light of dawn over the grimy, putrid section of the city he was in. He found an abandoned school that night and wandered inside thinking he was safe, and began drinking from an exposed tap by the empty abandoned school pool filled with cracks, vines, and gubbry, yet the tap somehow still operational. He overheard something coming from inside the building. "Fucking hell, Kippa looks like a lil beauty fell straight into our laps." Otto swung around nervously, clutching his kitchen knife tighter, remaining to it hidden under his sleeve, searching for where the voice came from, and then he saw the silhouettes of 2 tall, dangly men licking their lips and eerily trudging towards the outside door to where Otto was hiding. "Ah yeah, Jimmy, look at that, a perfect little treat just for us," said the other silhouette's voice, opening the outside door, revealing the 2 ugly, lanky, sickly-looking junkies who had been staying inside the abandoned school Otto had fled into the outside pool of. Otto didn't know what they meant, but he knew he was in danger. He knew he wasn't a little treat to be used and consumed. "Hang on, Kippa, before we enjoy our little blessing, let me re-up 1 second, said one of the men standing at the open doorway. "Oh nah, mate, of course. Go ahead. Quickly now. We don't want him to spoil." Otto was almost paralyzed in fear, unable to move for a moment, but he stood his ground, 6 years old, staring down the lanky, junky predators standing across from him in the pool in the doorway. Otto reaffirmed his grip on his little 2-inch kitchen knife, steadying his breath, remaining calm. He was in the bowl of the pool. If he tried to climb back up now, they'd catch him before he'd be able to escape. Otto gulped and took a defensive stance. One of the men grabbed a 2-liter bottle of sour milk, as they had nothing to refrigerate it with, pulled a used syringe out of his pocket and extracted a giant shot of rotten milk, and quickly shoved it harshly in his arm and injected it, having convulsions momentarily. "All right, Kippa, all done. Now let's play." The 2 began laughing eerily in a sick, sinister way as they stalked across the abandoned yard and climbed down into the empty pool bowl and attempted to corner Otto.
Otto still kept his blade hidden under his sleeve. The predators, Jimmy and Kippa or whatever they were called, hadn't noticed him clutching it, getting ready to stand his ground and defend his innocence. Kippa and Jimmy stood other side of him, getting ready to pounce. "Yes, let's play," the other one said, about to try and grab Otto. Otto let out an innocent, childlike tone and asked, Mr. An MRWHWH, what do you want?" "I don't think I want to play with you guys." Otto made puppy eyes towards the sick adult men, but it was an act. Otto was ready. Kippa lunged to grab Otto from behind him, and as his arm was about to grab Otto's clothes, Otto revealed the knife, clutching it like the killer from Psycho, stabbing into the shower, and dodged Kippa's advance and grabbed his hand and plunged the knife down with all his force like a guillotine into his hand over and over, and as Kippa lurched back, he began plunging the 2-inch kitchen knife as many times into his thighs and side as he could, screaming, "Die, pedo, die, die, die." Kippa crawled backwards on his hands and knees, begging for mercy. "Kippa. No, oh, don't die on me, mate." Jimmy shouted, running to Kippa's side. He looked up at 6-year-old Otto covered in Kippa's blood, panting from the amount of stabbing he had just done. Jimmy barked with venom in his voice, "You little fuck. Come here," and lurched towards Otto, and Otto swung his blade as hard as he could across Jimmy's face, slicing it open. Oh fuck, oh god." Jimmy fell back, clutching his face, lying alongside Kippa, who, while not mortally wounded, was writhing in pain. "It's all right, mate. I'll sort us out, don't you worry," Jimmy said, and pulled the rotten milk out of his pocket and began filling up 2 huge syringes while weeping in terror and pain. Otto took his cue and ran out of the abandoned school back into the city, stopping in the park to change into the only other set of clothes he had in his small rucksack, at least not covered in blood. The sun was beginning to rise and shined beautiful, unforgettable lights on the city streets. Otto had managed to make his way out of the more derelict part of the city after running miles and was panting, trying to catch his breath, looking for a place where authorities might not find him. It wouldn't be long before his evil nun caretakers would realize he had run away. The sunrise was incredible this particular morning and gave Otto a warm feeling of survival and renewal in his heart, somehow, even amongst the chaos. Otto tried entering any building he could in a district full of huge towers soaring into the sky and frantically trying to open locked doors. He did this until the sun was almost up, until he finally found a door in the street of random storefronts, residential towers, and various buildings that would open. A strange, slightly decrepit, huge, tall tower that looked the most out of any of them, like there was no chance of it opening, but for whatever reason it did, and Otto stepped inside, the door locking itself behind him, keeping him safe. Otto tried to open the door once it closed behind him, but it was deadlocked. But at that point he didn't care. In fact, it made him relieved nobody could follow him inside, especially Kippa and Jimmy. The room was an expansive but empty lobby with 2 doors either side, an elevator with staircases leading upstairs. Otto was hungry. He tried to use the elevator but the button didn't respond to him when he pressed it, so he quickly decided to walk up the right staircase to look for food. There weren't many windows and no lights were turned on in the lobby, so the light barely spilled onto the cream marble flooring and bone-colored walls, but the light colors made it easier for Otto to see in the dark. Venturing up the stairs, he noticed that the building was completely abandoned, but hadn't been trashed or vandalized. He saw no graffiti or signs of people, just a lot of cobwebs, and heard the occasional scuttle of rats hiding from his presence in the building. It seemed like the rodents that occupied this building were not used to any human presence, and Otto walking through really sent fear into them. Otto kept venturing through long hallways with cracking paint coming off the walls and a strange smell, not musty, not bad, but the air was thick, almost like he was inside a cave system spelunking. The air had not been breathed in a long time. Otto climbed up several more flights of stairs and made it to a large auditorium room completely stark and empty. He was panting and exhausted and explored behind the curtain into the green room and saw an ornate, incredibly comfortable looking lounge. He figured he was on the 5th floor and decided to rest here for a while. It was practically pitch black, but his eyes had adjusted to the darkness. He wiped off the dust and lingering cobwebs on the lounge in the green room and quickly fell asleep in his only pair of clothes, his hands and arms caked in predator blood as he dozed off. When he awoke, he opened what he realized were thick blackout curtains to the outside world and realized the sun was going down now, and the sunset was just as intoxicating and surreal as the sunrise that appeared when he entered the building. Otto paused and took it in for a moment, finding a brief solace in its beauty through the large smudged windows, despite his growing hunger pains. Otto kept climbing up a new spiral staircase coming from the green room till he made it to a separate elevator. This one seemed to work when he pressed the button. Otto hadn't even used an elevator before this point ever in his life and was working purely off instinct. But the doors opened and he went inside and instinctively pressed the top button. He figured, if he couldn't get out, if he couldn't find any food, he was at least going to get a view. The elevator ascended floor after floor till it reached the top level, and Otto stumbled out into a long dark hallway and followed it to a door to a penthouse suite that had been left ajar. But unlike the rest of the building, the insides of this part of the building seemed strangely not abandoned. Wandering through this huge ornate apartment, Otto made noises of shock and what? He stared at the cherub fountain in the center of the room and drank from it, finally alleviating a terrible thirst he had acquired from exploring this building the whole day with nothing to drink. As he drank, the crystal clear water taking it in like nectar, a strange tall lanky man with white hair, completely white eyes, and razor-sharp needle teeth, wearing a trench coat, a torn button-up white shirt, black tight pants with no socks, and cheap black what looked like Converse or Volley's shoes, similar to the shoes Otto was wearing, entered the room. "You look lost," said the man, seeming both unsurprised and bemused by his presence, but not annoyed, concerned or angry. He didn't seem to have a care in the world, like he had just walked in on a stranger who had joined his fire circle at a hippie music festival. But Otto was still intimidated, worried, and scared, probably mainly by his sheer demonic presence, as he was a human form but clearly not at the same time. Otto stood his ground and fished for his knife in his pocket and clutched it. The man raised an eyebrow and spoke calmly. "Oh, a knife is it? Well, go on. Show me what you've got, little man. I'm curious." Otto panicked. He didn't know if he was in danger or not, but wasn't going to take a risk after Jimmy and Kippa. He positioned the knife in front of himself ready to stab and charged at the man without thinking and planted it into his stomach, adding another tear to his shirt. The man gracefully fell onto the ground, now sitting, with Otto on top of him, stabbing repeatedly over and over at his torso, chest and neck. The man began chuckling lightly. No blood came from any of the stabs. Every stab Otto had made had instantly sealed itself, and the man was grinning, a huge crooked needle teeth grin staring into Otto's eyes with his empty white milky C's he had in place where his pupils and irises should have been. "You sure are feisty, huh?" the man said, and easily picked Otto up off of him by the nape of his neck and placed him on the ground in front of him as he stood back up. Otto was panting, flustered, and didn't know what to do. He felt his stomach and heard it grumble loudly, as did the man. He couldn't bring himself to look at the man's demonic face, but he stammered the only thing he could think to say. "I'm hungry," he said, and dropped the knife, beginning to sniffle and trying to hold back tears. "I see," said the man, almost sounding curious. "Well, I don't eat much. It's a nice pastime, but I don't have much use for it, you know." He looked at Otto, who begrudgingly turned his face to meet him, trying to keep a straight face, but tears now forcing themselves down his cheeks as he maintained his child but still strong composure. "Wait here. I'll make you something," said the man, and lead Otto to another room like a decadent living room with a huge TV. He turned the television on, which had just started playing the 7 o'clock news, and he said to Otto, "I'll be back. Wait here," and the man skulked out of the apartment and down a set of elevators as Otto sunk into the furniture, taking in the artwork splayed around the room and beginning to let GI's guard down and try to make sense of the evening news with his traumatized 6-year-old mind. The newscaster was making a report on the exact suburb he had just had to wander through escaping his orphanage, and describing the horrors that happened there, saying it was still overrun with ne'er-do-wells and was a zone occupied by the hippie factions, where even no police dared to go in fear of being killed. Otto thought to himself for the first time just how fucked up his orphanage must have been if it was situated in this suburb. About 30 minutes later, the man stumbled back into the apartment, holding a grocery bag, and walked through the living room into the huge ornate kitchen, remarking to Otto as he walked, "Come on." Otto got up and followed the man to the kitchen. He still hadn't said a word to him apart from "I'm hungry." The man began talking. "It's nice to have some company, child. I honestly can't remember the last time another soul was in here, or even the last time I had to leave," he said as he effortlessly rolled a cigarette with one hand and emptied the food onto the counter with the other, lighting the cigarette as Otto began to drool at the concept of food. "I honestly don't need to cook. I don't need this kitchen or what it can do for me, but being able to ace a recipe is fun and passes the time as well as tastes nice, although I always seem to forget what I've learned how to prepare. But anyway, here's what I know at the moment. Otto took a seat at the kitchen table and observed the man's stomach still growling, but now set at ease and calm and strangely curious of the way this demonic stranger seemed to operate. The man grabbed a saucepan, filled it with water and flamboyantly slammed it onto the cooktop as he simultaneously lit the cooktop. Otto chuckled at the act. The man salted the water and did the same thing on a second cooktop with the frying pan, turning on the heat and slamming it on in one motion. As the water began to boil and the pan began heating up, he grabbed a kitchen knife. All of his utensils and cooking tools seemed to be of the highest quality, Otto thought to himself as he compared them to his piece of shit kitchen paring knife he'd stolen from his orphanage. The man used the knife to slice open a deli packet of guanciale and swiftly and effortlessly cut them into cubes and tossed them into the searing pan. Otto didn't know what it was. The closest he'd eaten was bowline meat if he'd been obedient at the orphanage as a reward, but he knew he liked the smell when it sizzled and hit the pan. He began to become excited with anticipation for what this man was preparing. The man simultaneously tossed fresh pasta from a separate deli bag into the now boiling salted water and then grabbed a big chunk of pecorino cheese, which Otto didn't recognize either but also enjoyed the smell as the man repeatedly grated the whole chunk into grated cheese in a few quick rapid motions and then grabbed a bowl and took out a box of eggs and stood over the sink, transferring the yolk from the whites of 7 eggs quickly and effortlessly and tossing them into a bowl and mixing them with the grated cheese with a fork he grabbed from a drawer. He stirred fast like a demonic machine and it quickly turned to a smooth sauce. The man turned the heat off the fatty meat sizzling and drained the water from the pasta and in one motion mixed the egg yolks and cheese with the fried meat and pasta and began stirring, and he gradually introduced a small amount of the salty water left in the saucepan as he did. A delectable smell filled the room, and Otto was holding back tears as the man transferred the whole dish, an ungodly amount of cheesy meaty pasta, into a big bowl and planted it in front of the boy. The man also fished through the shopping bag and pulled out a couple ice-cold cans of Coca-Cola and placed them next to the bowl in front of Otto. Otto had never been allowed Coke and was unbelievable amounts of elated, a kind of feeling he'd never thought he'd be able to feel. He stared dumbfounded at the meal the man had swiftly prepared for him in minutes in a few motions and grabbed a can of Coke, unsure how to open it, shaking from the seemingly unwarranted compassion this man was giving him for no real reason apart from him being in the same space he occupied. The man opened the Coke can tab for the boy and placed a fork in his hand and said go on, grinning a horrifying needle-tooth grin with empty white eyes, but Otto now took it in and he looked at him and felt nothing but gratitude and began to scarf down the pasta and take his first sips of soft drink, and burped loudly as he powered through it and got woozy from the sheer amount of pleasure he was experiencing eating food like this and drinking something this sugary and carbonated as he'd never experienced such a thing. The man chuckled. To him, this whole act seemed almost done just for his own amusement, to watch how much it affected Otto to finally receive some clearly needed compassion. Otto slammed the about a kilo of cheesy meaty pasta and skilled 4 cans of ice-cold Coke, and muttered the first thing he'd said since he stated I'm hungry, and stated genuinely and unsure of how to say without feeling defenseless, thank you. The man chuckled and went, as Otto in turn passed out and fell off the chair, passing out into a food coma, and got caught by the man who carried his small body and placed it onto a large lounge with a blanket, and continued to smoke seemingly unfazed by the whole thing, and took up a seat and began watching the news. Part 33. GSK Diddy Minkler operatives. A day's work. The days had been stretching past for Cuthbert. He spent most of his time strung out on the meth plant weed that Wendy had begun harvesting. He had a pillowcase full he managed to sneak under her nose when he realized he had a taste for it. He really wanted to try the fruit, but even Wendy herself kept that strictly for super mega production, as it was a vital catalyst to synthesizing the drug. Cuthbert tried smoking the small amount of super mega he managed to nab from Wendy, but he found that it just made him spacey and he didn't have nearly enough, and he wasn't the type to inject and wasn't going to start now. The effect it did give him, he noticed, felt reminiscent of being on a single tab of acid, except the trip was purely dedicated to making the shine on anything he saw be much brighter than normal, revealing a spectrum of iridescent colors. Wendy had warned Cuthbert not to go fucking around with super mega not long after her and Davo had synthesized it, which Cuthbert thought seemed strange. Would she not want to get it on the market as soon as possible to give the public a taste? Cuthbert could tell she was hiding something, keeping a secret between her and Davo about the new drug, but he didn't pry as he was already under suspicion from her for regularly trying to pillage their lab for narcotics to take and sell for himself while she wasn't looking, and their relationship had grown increasingly sour. Cuthbert opened the Diddy Minkler UI. He still hadn't completed many contracts since the boy, only a couple. He was too paranoid the same thing would happen somehow and an app on his phone would force him to snuff out another kid. But Cuthbert opened the leaderboard and scowled at Kimmy's position and rank. It called him an AUG elite user, because he'd been on the app since early on, before Cuthbert had even been shown the app by Winston, and he had multiple achievement badges. Cuthbert scoffed. He just wanted to bring some money in on his terms. Since Marcus had started becoming obsessed with this upstart gang he was making with Wendy and the rest to protect her shop, he hadn't been checking in to work for Cuthbert, which raised alarm bells in his head. Cuthbert decided the perfect way to clear his head was to take on a contract, something lucrative, and he was gonna squeeze everything he could out of it. Cuthbert scoured through the contracts. The app was constantly updating and shifting how it worked slightly every other day, and Cuthbert hadn't opened it in a few days, and was struggling to understand the new system of color-coded targets and higher payouts for more deserving kills. He found what he was looking for, a used sports and luxury car salesman using his business as a front for human trafficking. Cuthbert accepted the contract, and a timer set for 4 hours appeared on the screen. Oh fuck, he stammered to himself and composed himself and took the elevator down to the garage, quickly arming his trusty .38 Beretta under his sports coat over his high-end polo. Lumiere had a lot of cars and motorbikes he never seemed to use. A lot of them seemed in pristine condition from over half a century ago. Cuthbert walked over to a brand new Ninja sports bike, went and found the keys in the garage drawers, and took off toward his target, who was about 2 hours away. He had to be quick as he knew failure to complete his contract would lead to getting flagged and not being able to use Diddy Minkler at all. Cuthbert wondered to himself as he drove whether he needed to bother with any of this. Like, Lumiere was clearly much wealthier than he ever let on and in control of a lot more power than he'd ever admit or realize. Cuthbert could just coast in his building indefinitely, hoping to God the agency wouldn't get on his back to double-cross Lumiere or try and bring him to Malachi. Cuthbert was dreading that call as inevitable as it seemed. He was in debt to the agency, Winston, and Malachi. Despite loathing everything they represent, but at the same time he was certain Malachi was trying to start something with Lumiere, some sort of escalation, especially now that a gang comprised of more than that Auto Kid and his skeleton crew was living in his building. Just with the Bake Kid and his little minions, the building already felt bustling in comparison to how many of them there were before, and Marcus was only intending on expanding. Cuthbert was convinced that whatever that coin that was delivered to Lumiere really was, it was an invitation from Malachi. Cuthbert was certain of it. He knew his tricks too well. It was an invitation to fuck around and find out, and with how enamored Lumiere had become with the coin since seemingly finding a use for it, it looked like it was going to happen, and it was all going to rest on Cuthbert's shoulders, because he was the only one who had a clue where to go. How to get there and what to look out for. Malachi's mansion in a bougie suburb in the hills, but currently that was neither here nor there. Cuthbert sped down the roads following the map on the Diddy Minkler app and made it to the used luxury car lot and rental place and sauntered inside very ready to kill someone and squeeze out everything he could. When Cuthbert sped into the luxury car lot, it was just about to close and Cuthbert did a burnout into the parking lot at the back of the shop, took off his helmet and looked at the Diddy Minkler app and saw his target was 25 meters away in the back of the building. He looked at the baseball card on his phone. It read Aiden Maris, 27 years old, human trafficking, money laundering. Aiden looked like a clean-cut, put together but also privileged and as if he hadn't worked for anything in his life, like a trust fund baby jock looking after his father's business. When Cuthbert waltzed into the main entrance sporting an array of discount impossibly luxurious vehicles, he took in the air and smelled the luxury new car smell along with the perfume like air freshener filling up the room. He noticed a chic in white garb sitting quietly at a couch by the doors to the hallway and offices where Aiden was. An attendant approached Cuthbert and said, "Hello sir, we're about to close but if I can help you for a last-minute rental I'm sure we can work something out." She looked at Cuthbert with a flared grin, eyeing up a last-minute sale, trying to give off a flirty aura to sway Cuthbert quickly before he quickly replied, "No sorry love, I need to see Aiden in the back, it's important. I'm a friend of his father's." The woman's face quickly turned to concern and she asked, "You need to see Aiden?" "Oh right." She eyed Cuthbert's outfit, his high-end polo, and due to that seemed to assess he must not have been lying. "Right, of course, is everything all right?" "Something happened." Cuthbert stared at her dead-eyed for a moment and then took a solemn tone and said, "Yes, his mother has passed." "Terrible." The woman was shocked. "What? How, what happened?" Cuthbert purses his lips and nodded, finding an answer: overdose. "Such an awful affliction." The woman was even more taken aback and shrieked louder, "What? Oh my God. How? I didn't know she. Oh God." Cuthbert put his hand on her shoulder, consoling her. "It'll be all right, love. She's in a better place." "Aiden's just back there yet?" "In that back room." The woman was now bawling, standing in place in front of Cuthbert. Clearly she knew Aiden's mother somehow. "Yet. No, yeah, it's the last door on the right, go ahead." "How could this happen?" "She's a preschool teacher." Cuthbert patted her shoulder and she clutched onto him in grief, crying, and he rubbed her back, consoling, and said, "Such misfortune. Oh, why must we live in such a cruel world?" The woman brought her head out from Cuthbert's chest, smiling through tears at his sentiment. "You're a good man," and she let go and walked him to the hallway. "Just that door there," she said, holding back tears, and returned to her chair at the desk at the end of the showroom, bawling. The sheik was observing the situation, suspiciously unsure what was happening. He looked at Cuthbert through the hallway, somewhat scowling. Cuthbert looked over, gave a polite smile, and looked into the room through the door window to see Aiden in a meeting with two more sheiks looking through some sort of catalog they had brought filled with passport-type photos of various women. It looked like Aiden was trying to decide or barter with the sheiks. Cuthbert hid by the window and put his ear to the door to listen into the meeting. "Yeah, Malachi's picky. They gotta be tip-top health, second trimester," said the younger Aiden's voice. The sheik replied in a deep Middle Eastern accent, "We are aware of Malachi's requirements. Allahu Akbar, these are exactly what he wants. Do not worry." "Okay, great. This is my first assignment for this client, but if he needs a dozen progressively more pregnant women, so be it. Do you know what he uses them for?" "I'm just curious, it's an odd request," asked Aiden. Cuthbert continued hugging the wall by the door. The two sheiks chuckled a low, dark, and sinister laugh and told Aiden, "The man has a particular diet we help provide." They looked into Aiden's eyes, who was trying not to shit himself and laughing along to the cryptic statement. "Okay, we go. You take them all, yes." Aiden cleared his throat and gulped, replying, "Sounds good, fellas, of course. See yourselves out." Cuthbert ducked to the back corner of the hallway as the two sheiks exited the room and went back to the showroom, where the attendant had stopped crying and asked them if they needed anything. Cuthbert slipped into Aiden's office very quietly. Aiden didn't notice Cuthbert as he was frantically cutting up lines of coke on the desk, trying to make himself less nervous after the interaction. Cuthbert quietly walked and stood behind Aiden. As he went in to do a rail, Aiden snorted one big line and swung his head up, feeling its effects as his head went up. Cuthbert grabbed it like a basketball and smashed it into his desk and pile of coke. Aiden instantly blacked out, and Cuthbert began looking through the folders and folders of women's photos who'd been captured. He went through Aiden's drawers as Aiden was slumped over his desk, mumbling slightly, and found a dossier in a book of files deep at the back, clearly trying to be kept hidden, reading Malachi top secret. Cuthbert looked through the dossier and it held long lists of names and the diets they'd been kept on, alongside where they'd been extracted from and how far through their pregnancy they were. At the back of the dossier was a file with faces and names crossed out and in red, each of them read either consumed or used or defective. Cuthbert looked through the notes in the defective column's names. It looked like these were Malachi's slaves who managed to resist enough to not have their offspring devoured, purposefully giving themselves stillbirths in spite of Malachi and fighting him at every turn. Cuthbert smirked and then felt a cold shiver go down his spine. The dossier read Containment Unit MM23 at the top of each page. He knew where this was. Malachi's mansion. It was also an agency outpost in the past and he would regularly be sent there to monitor prisoners back before he managed to cut most of his ties apart from those to Malachi's and Winston to the agency. MM-23 was the containment cell in the basement reserved for human experimentation. It was designed to keep those in it highly physically healthy but incapable of thought. You sick fuck. Cuthbert said to himself, you really need to desecrate the most holy. You really believe that eating babies is gonna fun. Ugh, at that moment Aiden began to stir and regain consciousness. He hadn't seen Cuthbert walk in earlier when he'd smashed his head into the desk and was immediately confronted by him slamming the Malachi dossier onto the desk in front of him and Cuthbert saying, you got some explaining to do, son. Cuthbert took on the tone of an agency or AGO official. The flood of memory of MM-23 gave him a surge of agency energy back into his veins, and he knew just how to do exactly what he'd planned to do on this contract. Not uncover Malachi but squeeze as much money as he could put of it. Aiden was incredibly flustered, unsure of what had just happened. One minute he was about to do some lines to celebrate a deal gone well and calm his nerves as to what he was trading in and with who, the next, Black, and now this man was towering over his desk waving the evidence of his misdeeds in his face. I don't know what that is, Jesus. You got me mixed up, what is that? You don't think it has something to do with me, do you? Said Aiden, desperately trying to weasel his way out of guilt. It was in your drawer, son, come on. Cuthbert eyed Aiden sternly. Aiden was petrified. Relax, kid, said Cuthbert as he grabbed a pack of cigarettes from his polo pocket and lit two, handing one to Aiden, who shakily took it in his hand and started sheepishly drawing at it. Now in ASIO. In the agency. We have special ways of dealing with this sort of thing. Your punishment is going to be plain and simple. Cuthbert took a long drag of his cigarette and blew a plume of smoke into Aiden's face. Cuthbert paused. Aiden was waiting desperately for an answer. WH what? He eventually let out through his bloodied broken nose, bankruptcy. Said Cuthbert firmly. Aiden was taken aback. The two were still sharing a cigarette, about halfway through their darts now. If you want to be clean of this nonsense and not be brought to a bloody UN trial for your crimes against humanity, you're gonna have to empty all your bank accounts, every cent from this business, anything worth money liquidated, and transfer it into this account. Cuthbert showed Aiden his bank account details. It had no name of anything linking it to Cuthbert, so Aiden assumed it must be some sort of government fund. Aiden paused, taking the request in, and then quickly remembered what he'd been doing and what would happen if it got out, and quickly changed his vibe to saying, of course sir, right away sir, and grabbed the phone and his phone in each hand, methodically emptying everything he had from all of his accounts except one that was partly owned by his father. Cuthbert remained standing over Aiden, stoic, taking drags of his cigarette as Aiden did the deed. Okay, done, said Aiden. Is that everything? Asked Cuthbert. There was a pause. Well, not quite, but everything, said Cuthbert with authority, and Aiden quickly emptied his and his dad's joint account into Cuthbert's bank account also. The ember of the cigarette Aiden had been holding reached his fingers and burned him, and he dropped the butt on the desk. Ow. He let out, so I'm good, right? Everything's sorted, it's all clean now, right? And then looked up hopefully at Cuthbert, who took one more big drag from his cigarette, smoking through the filter, and butted it into the desk. Right, he replied, and Aiden took a huge sign of relief and hung his head towards the desk, and then, bang. Cuthbert shot a single shot through the back of Aiden's temple, which was followed by a scream from the attendant. Part 34. Cuthbert and Winston Agency Operations 1. The briefing room was not too large but just enough to be intimidating. It had no windows and every corner and crack of it was sealed with plain white linoleum, even the ceiling. The air inside was dead and acrid, and the only thing inside this room was a large whiteboard part computer interface at the front of the room and multiple stacks of old used white school chairs sitting at the back of the room, most cracked or breaking apart. Cuthbert and Winston were sat at the middle of the room with one other agency recruit, an initiate, who was looking too eager and dumb to get very far here. Winston turned to Cuthbert. The two were sat together a few feet from the initiate, differentiating themselves as somewhat seasoned operatives. How long you give the new guy? Winston asked Cuthbert, who was staring dead ahead waiting for their handler to enter the room. Fuck him. He replied bluntly, and Winston snickered slightly, looking over at the start-eyed recruit just slightly as he looked back, too innocent in his eyes. The lights were harsh and fluorescent, and ever so slightly in misrepair, flashing off occasionally quietly apart from a dull buzz. A woman entered the room, in a pitch-black pantsuit and sleek boots, with slicked-back black hair to the bottom of her neck, like Trinity from The Matrix. She walked with authority. Winston was quietly scared. He was around 30 at this point and had been in several briefings with this woman who named herself Minerva, but he couldn't shake the dread he felt with her in the room. Not yet. Cuthbert stared dead ahead, almost looking into her dark black eyes, but being sure not to. Cuthbert had been in this agency now since his teens, orchestrating various missions for the agency. Winston had been assigned to keep an eye on him. He had been in the agency longer, at least by a decade, but wasn't the same tier of operator Cuthbert had proved himself to be, at least not yet. Minerva began to speak. Squad CW/P17, your upcoming mission is as follows. Minerva tapped on the whiteboard computer interface, and a hologram of a rural village, torn apart, appeared in a huge map on the linoleum ground, filling the space between the three. The initiate nervously picked his chair up and brought it next to Winston and Cuthbert, by the hologram of a destroyed primitive village. The initiate whispered to Winston, who looked back over at the initiate, mouth agape at his audacity to speak at all during the briefing. Hey. I'm Peter. Cuthbert took no notice, staring dead ahead into the hologram, starting to study it. Winston didn't reply either, simply chortled slightly until Minerva came cracking and berating Peter for his slight whisper. Silence is mandatory during your briefing, initiate. Peter looked up quickly, suddenly sweating bullets. He'd been calm, too carefree until this moment. All right, he said, looking directly now at Minerva. Silence, barked Minerva back at his response. You'll be sure to remember that, she said, now scowling at Peter. A crooked grin appeared on Cuthbert's face, and Winston was almost holding back laughter at Peter's ignorance. There was a brief silence between the four as Minerva took time to eye down Peter the initiate, then she continued. This is another holy light experiment's evidence extraction. Danger level is likely minimal aside from iridescence exposure, which you will be shielded from with your supplied hazard wear. Removal of your hazard wear may lead to cell breakdown and sudden death and is highly ill-advised. The agency requires organic human samples with traces of holy light residue, or iridescent interference, with human tissue to be brought back to headquarters for further analysis. Minerva began manipulating the whiteboard computer interface with her hand to show red swans in the decaying rundown village hologram. At that moment Peter the Initiate decided to pipe up again. What are the holy light experiments? Sorry, I'm new. Minerva scowled at him, saying nothing for a good 5 seconds. Cuthbert let out a satisfied exhale and Winston sighed and hung his head. Minerva then pulled a large agency standard pistol from her pantsuit and let out a single loud 50 caliber shot, directly through Peter's bewildered, unaware forehead. His head was erupted onto the linoleum behind him, covering the stark white, shiny linoleum with bone fragments and brain matter. Silence. I demand silence during briefings. Minerva let out in frustration to the corpse now slumped and falling off the chair. Minerva composed herself, wiping down her hands on her pantsuit and putting her gun back away. That's why I like you too, she said, her words oozing with power. Cuthbert nodded slightly and Winston gave a big smile to her, looking back and forth at her and the corpse, letting out small exhales through his nose, trying to cover his inner panic for amusement. Cuthbert didn't bother to look at the corpse, he'd been expecting this anyway. Obedient, said Minerva, looking at the two and the corpse. Winston gulped as she looked into their eyes, maintaining his smile. Cuthbert looked dead ahead, awaiting orders. He was around 20 at this time. Minerva looked down at Cuthbert quickly, a twisted smile coming across her face. Especially you, Bertie. Our own agency prodigy. There was another short pause and Cuthbert bowed his head somewhat and looked back directly at Minerva. Minerva continued, you will be flown in by helicopter in 100 hours. Remember, your objective is to retrieve human tissue with holy light exposure, and if you come across any experiment, living remnants or survivors, exterminate everyone immediately, no exceptions. Initiate Peter has proven useless, but this is estimated as a 3-man mission, so I'll bring on a senior operator to help you and make sure this goes through without a hitch. Dale will accompany you too, she said as she took a pager device off her belt and input some various directives into it to summon this Dale. Cuthbert and Winston both let off relieved sighs. Each of them liked Dale for different reasons. He was a senior operative, respected by the two, but also after Cuthbert's parents' death, he had acted as Cuthbert's guardian as he grew up in the agency as a small child and was the one to give him the news of his parents' demise. And he was also the only memory Cuthbert had of parental benevolence before he was sent to grow up with sadistic Malachi for the rest of his formative years, when the agency had decided against housing a child, and when Malachi requested for Cuthbert to be put in his care personally. Any questions? Dale is arriving shortly, Minerva said. There was another pause. Likelihood of complication? Asked Cuthbert. Yeah, added Winston, mid to low. But the holy light experiments have proven erratic. Unexpected complications have been known to occur with them. So along with your agency firearms, you will be assigned automatic rifles and additional equipment of that nature in your helicopter. These experiments have been known to create, let's say, unexpected anomalies. We have lost some good operatives on other similar extraction mission. So be on your guard. Right, replied Winston, wanting to know more but also being wary of trying to pry information. Cuthbert said nothing and simply continued studying the hologram. A few moments passed and Dale arrived. He was middle-aged with a kind wrinkled face. He had a swagger which seemed unnatural for this environment, but it also seemed as if he had earned it from years of service. How you doing, young bloodfuckers? Dale said loudly, booming through the room as he patted Minerva on the back what seemed a little too hard, and said, evening Minerva, or morning. I don't know. You know it's so hard to tell in this fucking building, huh? He began chuckling as he walked to the back of the room and grabbed a half-broken white school chair and planted it next to Cuthbert, who had taken on a slight comforted smile since Dale entered the room. Hello Dale, replied Minerva, a little annoyed but clearly used to his energy. Dale turned to Cuthbert regarding the hologram on the ground, taking on the tone of something like a beloved camp counselor, and Cuthbert seemed to melt his tough exterior just a little in his presence, which Winston always took note of with a raised eyebrow. Village is it? Asked Dale to Cuthbert, sounding enthusiastic. Extraction, replied Cuthbert simply but seeming more calm now. Holy light experiments, he added. Oh great. These ones are like Lucky Dip, replied Dale excitedly. Winston turned to him confused. And conc earn now, what's that mean? He asked Dale. Dale laughed a little and said, oh don't worry mate. We'll see when we get there, won't we? Right, replied Winston unsatisfied. Briefing concluded, barked Minerva, and the three shuffled out of the room, leaving behind the corpse of Peter the Initiate. Before closing the door behind them, Minerva yelled out, clean up, and custodians quickly appeared out of nowhere, dead in the eyes, and went into the room to deal with Peter's body. The three made their way through various hallways and staircases all lined with white linoleum and with stale air and no windows, and emerged to a helicopter pad where a military-style chopper was beginning to land. Good luck boys, said Minerva to the three as she went back inside. Don't you worry about us, Minnie, grinned Dale. Cuthbert nodded quietly and Winston barked, yes ma'am, and she returned inside the building as the three agency operatives boarded the military chopper and begun putting on the hazard suits that had been specified as they sped through the sky. The chopper tore through the bush as the three operatives, Dale, Winston, and young Cuthbert, made their way closer to the rundown village to collect samples of whatever the agency had left behind with their so-called holy light experiments with the iridescent field. Cuthbert looked ahead, stone-faced in the helicopter cabin, as did Winston. Dale was hunched over with a grin on his face, loading shells into his quad AA-12 grenade launcher. Cheer up boys, said Dale to the two. Winston stared at him, almost more dead in the eyes. Cuthbert looked up, a slight smile forming on his face. Come on Bertie. You know you haven't witnessed the runoff we've been seeing from these experiments. Might have some fun. said Dale. Cuthbert let out a slight noise almost like a laugh and said we'll see. Winston snorted and begun loading his quad AA-12 also, and Cuthbert followed suit as the chopper eased down to the ground near some half-burned huts. The ground was covered in a lilac purplish almost thick pus-like substance spreading across the huts and ground in long veins, and the air was thick and putrid. Luckily the operatives' hazmat-style suits kept them protected from the stench. The chopper began to land on a hill just above the burnt village, the blades spinning causing the long grass underneath to fly around wildly as it lowered to the ground. The blades of the chopper were still spinning. Dale stepped out first, jumping out of the cockpit onto the grass after saying let's go boys. Cuthbert followed silent and Winston came close behind and barked into his hazmat suit radio. Back to agency operations headquarters execute, jumped and landed on the grass next to Dale and Cuthbert. Let's check it out, said Dale waving Cuthbert and Winston over with his quad AA-12. I'll take the back end, you and Cuthbert take the front, we'll meet in the middle. Winston stated and Dale looked at Winston strangely as if there was something being unsaid and Cuthbert took slight notice but was focused on scoping the terrain. Dale began to laugh a weirdly deep, strange guttural laugh, gave Winston a sly wink, which Cuthbert did notice and had a perplexed look on his face from it. Alrighty then, exclaimed Dale, come on Bert. We'll check out the church. He said let's go, said Cuthbert. The two and Winston split up, trudging through the lilac pus spread all over the ground in veins and puddles into a thick mist like massive clouds bobbing above the ground.